Particular duties and problems. 1. Promotions. Would you like me to show you one more aspect of this contest which is full of innumerable dangers? Come and take a peep at the public festivals, at which it is the custom for most appointments to ecclesiastical office to be made. You will see the priest assailed as many accusations as there are persons under his rule. For all who are qualified to bestow the honor are then split into many factions, and the synod of presbyters can be seen agreeing neither among themselves nor with the one who has received the episcopal office. Each man stands alone. One chooses this candidate and that another that. The reason is that they do not all concentrate on the one thing they should: spiritual worth. There are other considerations which influence appointment to office. For example, one man says, "Let this man be chosen because he belongs to a distinguished family." Another says, "Because he possesses a large fortune and would not need supporting out of the church's revenues." Another, "Because he is a convert from the other side." One man is anxious to promote above the rest a friend, another a relative, another someone who flatters him. No one will look for the best qualified man or apply any spiritual test. I myself, so far from thinking these are worthy grounds for approving priests, should not dare to select a man quickly, even if he showed great piety, though to me it is no small qualification for that office, unless he combined with piety considerable intelligence as well. For I know many who have kept themselves under discipline all their life and exhausted their bodies with fasting, and who, as long as they were allowed to live alone and attend to their own needs, were acceptable to God and every day, made great progress in this philosophy. Yet when they returned to normal society and had to correct the follies of the common people, they either did not begin to cope with so great a responsibility, or else when compelled to remain at their post, abandoned their former high standards, brought a heavy penalty on themselves, and were not of the least use to others. Again, if a man has spent all his life in the lowest order of the ministry and has reached extreme old age, we will not, simply out of respect for his age, promote him to the next order. What if he should still be unsuitable, even after a lifetime? I do not say this out of disrespect for gray hairs, nor am I laying down a rule that we should entirely exclude from such responsibility those who come from the monastic fraternity. It has turned out that many, even from that body, have shed luster upon this office. But I am anxious to show that if neither piety by itself nor old age alone are sufficient to prove a man worthy of the priesthood, the reasons I have mentioned are hardly likely to do so. Other people go on to give reasons which are stranger still. Some are enlisted in the ranks of the clergy to prevent their siding with the enemy, and others because of their bad character, to stop them causing a lot of trouble if they are overlooked. Could any worse violation of the right take place than that corrupt men, replete with vices, should be courted to the very things for which they ought to be punished, and promoted to priestly dignity for the very things for which they ought to be forbidden to cross the threshold of the church? Tell me, do we need to look any further for the cause of God's anger when we expose the most sacred, awe-inspiring things to defilement by wicked or worthless men? When some men are entrusted with things unsuited to them, and others with things quite beyond their powers, they make the church as unstable as Euripus. I once used to deride secular rulers because they distributed honors not on grounds of inherent merit, but of wealth or seniority or worldly rank. But when I heard that this stupidity had swaggered into our own affairs too, I no longer reckon their action so strange. For why should we be surprised that worldly people, who love the praise of the mob and do everything for money, should make this mistake, when those who claim to have renounced all desires are no better? For although they are contending for heavenly rewards, they act as though they had to decide merely about acres of land or something else of the kind. They simply take commonplace men and put them in charge of those things for which the only begotten Son of God did not disdain to empty himself of his own glory and be made man and to receive the form of a servant and to be spitted upon and buffeted to die the most shameful death. And they do not stop at this, but go on to other actions stranger still. They do not merely choose the unworthy, they reject those who are suitable. As though it were necessary to undermine the safety of the church in both ways, or as though the first reason were not enough to kindle the wrath of God, they have added another reason no less serious. For I think it is as bad to keep out the capable as to bring in the useless. And this is done to prevent the flock of Christ from finding comfort or a breathing space anywhere. Does not this deserve a hail of thunderbolts? Does it not deserve some special hell and not just the one we are threatened with? Yet all these evils are suffered and borne patiently by the one who does not desire the death of the sinner, but rather that he should be converted and live. How can we marvel enough at his love for man, or wonder at his mercy? Christians damage Christ's cause more than his enemies and foes. But the good Lord still shows his kindness and calls us to repentance. Glory be to thee, O Lord, glory be to thee. What an abyss of love is in thee! How great are the riches of thy forbearance! Men who through thy name have come to be worthy and respected instead of mean and worthless, use that honor against thee who gavest it, and dare what is forbidden, and insult what is holy, rejecting and excluding the earnest, in order that evil men may have perfect freedom and full security to subvert whatever they desire. If you want to know the reasons for this scandal, you will find that they are like those I mentioned before. They have one root, and so to speak, one mother, malice. Yet they are not all of one kind, but different. One man says, reject him because he's young. Another says, because he has not yet learned how to flatter. Another, because he has offended so-and-so. Or again, someone says, reject him in case so-and-so should be hurt and to see his own nominee rejected and this man appointed. Another says, reject him because he is good and just. Another, because sinners fear him. And another gives some other such reason. They have ready to hand all the pretexts they require. Even the number of the existing clergy is sufficient argument, when they have no better. Or they argue that it is advisable not to promote a man to this honor suddenly, but gently and by degrees. And they can find as many other reasons as they want. But I should like to ask you what a bishop ought to do when he has to contend with so many winds. How can he stand firm against such great breakers? How can he repel all these attacks? If he settles the question by honest assessment, all men become enemies and foes to him and to those whom he has chosen. Everything they do is meant to create hostility to him. They stir up feuds daily and heap endless ridicule on those he has chosen, until they either depose them or get their own men in. It is like a captain having pirates sailing with him on board ship and continually plotting hour by hour against him and the sailors and crew. If, on the other hand, he prefers popularity with them to his own safety and so chooses unsuitable men, he will incur God's enmity in place of theirs. And what could be worse than that? And his relations with them will be more difficult than before, since they will all conspire together to become so much the stronger. When fierce winds meet from contrary quarters, the sea which before was quiet suddenly rages and towers, and destroys those who sail on it. So the calm sea of the church, when evil men are accepted, is filled with surf and wreckage. Consider, then, what qualities a man needs if he is to withstand such a tempest and deal successfully with these obstacles to the common good. He must be dignified yet modest, impressive yet kindly, masterful yet approachable, impartial yet courteous, humble but not servile, vehement yet gentle, in order that he may be able calmly to resist all these dangers and to promote a suitable man with full authority, even though everyone opposes him, and reject an unsuitable man with equal authority, even though everyone favors him. One thing alone he must consider, the edification of the church. He must do nothing out of hostility or favor. Well then, do you think it was unreasonable to excuse myself from serving in this capacity? And even yet I have not made all my points to you. I have still more to say, so do not lose patience with an intimate friend who wants to convince you that he is clear of your imputations. For what I say will not only be of service to you in my defense, but will probably afford considerable help toward your own exercise of the office. For anyone who is about to enter upon this walk of life needs to explore it all thoroughly beforehand, and only then to undertake this ministry. And why? Because if he studies the difficulties beforehand, he will at any rate have the advantage of not being taken by surprise when they crop up. Widows and the sick. 2. Widows and the sick. Would you like us, then, to pass on to the next superintendence of the widows? On next to the superintendence of widows, or the charge of the virgins, or the difficulties of the judicial work. For in each of these there is anxiety of a different kind and more danger than anxiety. First, to begin with, what appears to be easier than the rest, the ministry to the widows seems to involve those who are in charge of them only in responsibility of a financial nature. But this is not so. On the contrary, here, too, close scrutiny is needed when they are enrolled. Entering their names carelessly and casually has led to untold troubles. They have wrecked homes and broken marriages and often been detected stealing and procuring and committing other disgraceful offenses like these. To support women like that from church funds brings down vengeance from God and utter condemnation from men, and discourages those who want to do good. For who would ever choose to spend the money which he is commanded to give to Christ on those who bring Christ's name into dishonor? And that is why it is necessary to make a long and precise scrutiny, to prevent those whom I have described, as well as those who can provide for themselves, from plundering the table of those who cannot. After this scrutiny there follows another big anxiety, to see that the means for their support should pour in abundantly, like water from a spring, and never fail. For involuntary poverty is an insatiable evil, cureless and unthankful. Great wisdom and plenty of energy are required to take away all occasion for complaint and stop their tongues wagging. When people see anyone superior to avarice, they at once point him out as suitable for this administration. But I do not think that honesty by itself is enough. You must look for it, first of all, since without it a man will be a spoiler rather than a guardian, and a wolf instead of a shepherd. But you must look for the possession of another quality as well, and that is forbearance, the source of all human blessings, which guides the soul to anchorage and escorts it into a fair haven. Widows as a class, owing partly to their poverty, partly to their age, and partly to their sex, use an unbridled freedom of speech, to call it no worse. They scold out of season and find unnecessary fault and lament when they ought to be thankful for, and criticize what they ought to welcome. The man in charge of them must bear it all politely and not be provoked by their inopportune fussing or their unreasonable complaints. For persons of this kind deserve to be pitied, not insulted, for their misfortunes, and it would be a mark of utter cruelty to take advantage of their misfortunes and add to the pain of poverty the pain of insult. That is why a very wise man, observing the avarice and indifference of human nature, realized the terrible characteristic of poverty, that it debases the most generous soul and often teaches it to lose all shame on such matters. And so, to prevent anyone being angry when solicited by them, and becoming their enemy when he ought to be their helper, because provoked by continual entreaty, he instructs us to be gentle and accessible to the needy, saying, Incline thine ear to a poor man, without grieving the answer, and answer him with peaceable words and meekness. And ignoring those who provoke a man in distress, for what can you say to such sinners? He speaks to anyone who can bear another's infirmity, urging him to help him up by kind looks and gentle words before making a gift. If anyone should not actually take what is theirs, but should load them with reproaches and insult them, and be exasperated by them, he not only fails to relieve the desperation of poverty by his gift, but aggravates its misery by his abuse. For even if they are compelled by sheer hunger to be all too brazen, they are still hurt by this necessity. So when they are forced to beg by fear of starvation, and to be brazen by their begging, and are insulted because of their brazenness, the force of despondency which attacks them comes subtly and casts a deep gloom over them. Whoever is in charge of them should be so long-suffering that far from increasing their despondency by his own irritation, he actually soothes most of it away by his sympathy. For just as a rich man insulted forgets the benefit of his wealth through the pain of the insult, so one of those who hears a kindly word and receives a gift offered with sympathy brightens up and is happy. The gift is doubled by the very manner of the giving. I say this not of myself, but on the authority of the writer, whose advice I have quoted already. My son, he says, do thy good deeds, and no blemish, and no grief of words in any of thy giving. Shall not the dew assuage the scorching heat? So is a word better than a gift. Lo, a word is better than a gift. But both are with a gracious man. Both are with a gracious man. The guardian of those people must be not only just and forbearing, but also a good steward. For if this quality is missing, the money of the poor is again exposed to equal risk of loss. But now it has happened that someone entrusted with this ministry, and having collected a lot of money, has not wasted it on himself, but has not spent it on the needy either, except for a few. He has hidden and hoarded most of it until bad times have come and betrayed it into the hands of his enemies. Much foresight, therefore, is needed to prevent the resources of the church either piling up or running short. It is better to distribute all that is inscribed among the needy quickly, and to lay up treasure for the church in the goodwill of the congregation. But what a lot of expense and care and thought on the part of those in charge is required for hospitality to strangers and care of the sick. This is never less, and often more than the expenditure I have already mentioned. The man in charge must be a discreet and shrewd treasurer, so as to encourage the wealthy to emulate one another and to give cheerfully of their substance. His object is to provide for the relief of the sick without scourging the souls of the contributors. And here he must show outstanding forbearance and concern. Sick men are hard to please and given to languor. Unless every attention and care is lavished on them, the smallest neglect is enough to cause the patient great distress. As for the care of virgins, the anxiety is all the greater in proportion as the treasure is more precious, and this group is more like the church's princesses than any other. Before now, great numbers of women, full of innumerable vices, have intruded into the ranks of these holy ones. The grief for failure, too, is greater here. Just as it is not the same thing for a freeborn girl and her servant to fall into sin, so it is not the same for a virgin and a widow. For it has become unremarkable for widows to gossip and to vilify each other, and to flatter, and to lose their self-respect, and to be seen everywhere, and to loiter about the marketplace. But the virgin has prepared herself for a greater prize, and devoted herself to the highest philosophy. She professes to display on earth the behavior of the angels, and has the task of managing the concerns of the disembodied spirits while still living in the flesh. She must not walk abroad unnecessarily or often. She may not speak at all without good reason. She should not even know the meaning of abuse or flattery. And so she needs the closest watch and the greatest support, for the enemy of holiness is always marking them down and stalking them particularly, in readiness to swallow up any who stumble and fall, as do the many men who plot their downfall, and, to crown all, their own passionate natures. They have to arm themselves against a double attack, one launched from the outside and the other mounting from within. And so their guardian has much anxiety and still more danger and distress should anything undesirable happen, which God forbid. For if a daughter is a secret cause of wakefulness to her father, and his care for her makes him lose sleep through his great anxiety that she may be barren, or pass her prime unmarried, or be hated by her husband, what will a man feel whose anxiety is over none of these dangers, but others far greater than these? For here it is not a man who is disgraced, but Christ himself. And here barrenness does not just bring reproach, but the trouble ends in the soul's destruction. For every tree, he says, that which bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. And if she is hated by the bridegroom, it does not suffice to take a bill of divorcement and depart, but for that hatred he gives the punishment of eternal torment. A natural father has many things that make it easy to watch over his daughter. For a mother and a nurse and plenty of maids and the security of the house help a father to guard the girl. She is not allowed to be perpetually dashing into the marketplace, and when she does go, she is not compelled to show herself to anyone she meets, since the dusk of the evening conceals her no less than the walls of the house, if she does not want to be seen. And apart from this, she is not answerable for herself, and so is never compelled to come into the presence of men. For neither concern for the necessities of life, nor the insults of wrongdoers, nor anything else like that, makes any such encounter necessary for her, since her father represents her in all capacities. But she herself has one care only, not to do or say anything unworthy of her proper modesty. But in the case of a virgin, there are many circumstances that make it difficult, or rather impossible, for her spiritual father to protect her. He cannot keep her at home with himself, since it would not be decent or safe to live together like that. For even if they themselves take no harm, but continue to keep their chastity undefiled, they will have to answer for the souls they lead astray, no less than if they had actually sinned against each other. Now, since this arrangement is impossible, it is not easy to discover the shifts of her spirit, to check all that tends to disorder, and to train and improve all that is well ordered and regular. Nor is it simple to interfere with her movements abroad. Her poverty and her independence do not permit him to be a close scrutineer of the decorum she ought to display, for she is compelled to attend to all her own needs, and she has many excuses for going out if she wants to misbehave. So someone orders her always to remain at home. He must take away these pretexts. So if someone orders her always to remain at home, he must take away these pretexts, make sufficient provision for her daily needs, and give her a woman to attend to them. She must also be forbidden funerals and vigils, for that subtle serpent knows very well how to spread his poison even by means of good deeds. The virgin must be completely immured, and must leave her house only a few times each year, when urgent necessity compels her. Should anyone say that this is not the bishop's job to attend to any of this, he must bear in mind that all particular anxieties and accusations are referred to him. It is much better for him to manage everything himself, and so be rid of the criticism which he must otherwise incur through the faults of others, than to shed some particular ministry and go in fear of being called to account for what others do. Besides, if he does everything himself, he gets through all his business very easily. But if he has to do this and to persuade everyone else to agree as well, the relief he gets through freedom from personal labor is not equal to the trouble and bother he is caused by those who oppose him and resist his decisions. But I cannot enumerate all the anxieties caused by virgins. The fact is that when they are enrolled, they cause extraordinary trouble to the man who is entrusted with this administration. 4. Arbitration, visiting, excommunication. The judicial function involves innumerable burdens and much expenditure of time, and greater difficulties even than those that face the judges in secular cases. It is a problem to find where justice lies, and it is hard not to pervert it when found. But expenditure of time and difficulty are not the only things involved. There is also no little danger. Before now, some of the weaker brethren have got involved in disputes, and finding no favoritism, have made shipwreck concerning the faith. For many of these who have suffered wrong hate, those who cannot help them, just as much as those who did the wrong. They will not take into account the complicated nature of the business, nor the difficulty of appointing a suitable time, or the limitation of ecclesiastical authority, or anything else of the kind. They are merciless critics, who recognize only one thing in the judge's favor: deliverance from the troubles which oppress them. If he cannot offer them this, however many good reasons he gives, he will never avoid their condemnation. And since I have already mentioned favoritism, let me disclose to you another occasion for blame. If the bishop does not pay a more extensive round of daily visits than ordinary loungers, indescribable offense will be taken. Not only the sick, but the healthy want to be visited by the bishop, not so much because their piety prompts them, as because most of them lay claim to honor and distinction. And if he happens to visit one of the richer and more influential men more frequently, prompted by some special need and for the common good of the church, he wins at once the reputation of a flatterer and a toady. But why mention favoritism in visiting? The mere way in which they address people is enough to incur such a load of criticism that they are often burdened and prostrated by despondency. Why they have to render account for the merest glance. People subject their casual doings to a minute examination, assessing the strength of their voice, the expression of their face, the frequency of their laugh. He smiled so affably at so-and-so, says one, and spoke to him with a bright face and hearty voice, but he was less pleasant with me, and indeed quite casual. When a crowd is seated together, if he does not turn his eyes in every direction while conversing, the rest say his action is an insult. Who then, but a man of outstanding strength, could cope with so many accusers, and either not be indicted by them at all or escape after indictment? He ought to have no accusers, or if this is impossible, he should elude their accusations. And if this is not easy either, but there are some people who take pleasure in offhand and random accusations, then he must firmly refuse to be dismayed by these complaints. A man who is justly accused can easily bear with his accuser. For since there is no accuser more bitter than our own conscience, we have no difficulty in bearing the milder accusations of others, when we have first been convicted by that most severe accuser. But when someone whose conscience acquits him of evil is accused without a cause, he is quickly roused to anger, and easily falls into desperation, unless he has trained himself already to bear the mischief of the mob. For it is quite impossible for anyone who is idly slandered and accused not to be troubled and hurt by such stupid conduct. And how can one describe the grief bishops feel when anyone has to be excommunicated from the body of the church? If only the trouble went no further than grief. But in fact, it may lead to terrible loss. For it is to be feared if a man is punished too severely. He may do what St. Paul speaks of, and be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. Here, too, great care is needed to ensure that what was meant to help does not become an occasion of greater loss. For the vengeance for sins which he commits after such treatment is shared by the surgeon who lances the wound unskillfully. What punishment, then, must a man expect when he not only has to render account for his own offenses, but also stands in the utmost peril of for the sins of others? If we shudder when our own offenses are examined, for fear that we shall not be able to escape the threatened fire, what must that man expect to suffer who will have to answer for so many? To prove that this is true, hear what St. Paul says, or rather, not Paul, but Christ who speaks in him. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit to them, for they watch in behalf of your souls, as they that shall give account. Is the fear of this threat trivial? We dare not say it is. Surely all this is enough to persuade the most stubborn and obstinate that my reason for hiding was not arrogance or vainglory, but fear for my own safety, and a clear view of the responsibilities involved.